Devonshire, June 1821. The wedding feast at Rathmore Hall had been arranged with the precision of a household that understood occasions, and the Duke of Rathmore's household understood occasions the way old families understood weather, instinctively, historically, and with a confidence that rarely required revision. 200 guests, the long gallery lit with beeswax candles, the county's finest silver on linen that had been in the family since the reign of George II. And at the center of the top table, the bride, Jessamine Calloway, now the Duchess of Rathmore for approximately 4 hours, standing with a glass of wine in her hand and an expression that 3 people in the room recognized as dangerous and the rest mistook for composure. She raised the glass. What she said next would be discussed in Devonshire drawing rooms for the rest of the decade. But to understand the toast, you must first understand the woman who made it. Jessamine Calloway arrived in Devonshire society in the autumn of 1820, which was to say she arrived with her father's fortune, her mother's education, and the practiced attention of a woman who had learned, by the age of 19, that rooms told you everything about the people who owned them if you knew how to read them. She was the only child of Silas Calloway, whose textile mills in Halifax had made him wealthy enough to be uncomfortable in the north and interesting enough to be cautious about in the south. He had sent her to school in Bath, where she had learned languages, music, and the particular skill of identifying the difference between a welcome and a reception, a distinction that most people never noticed, and that governed, in Jessamine's experience, everything that followed. She was not beautiful in the way the county expected its beauties to be assembled. She did not arrange herself for rooms, did not modify her expression to suit the company. What she had instead was a quality of attention that people found, depending on their own confidence, either flattering or unsettling. She listened with her entire face. She remembered what people said 3 conversations ago and referred to it in the 4th, which made careful people cautious and careless people nervous. Her father, who had spent 22 years observing his daughter with the attention of a man who understood that his greatest investment was not in looms, had told her once that she had the rarest quality in business. She could see what a room wanted before the room knew it wanted it. She had been 15 at the time. She had looked at him and said, "That is not a business quality, Father. That is a survival quality." He had not corrected her. She arrived in Devonshire with 3 trunks, a letter of introduction from a Bath acquaintance, and the absolute certainty that she was being evaluated by every drawing room in the county before she had entered any of them. She was correct about the evaluation. Devonshire was a county that prided itself on its discernment, which meant it prided itself on forming opinions early and defending them permanently. New money from Halifax was a category they had encountered before. They had a system for it. Jessamine intended to be the exception to the system, though she had not yet decided in which direction. The Duke of Rathmore was introduced to her at the Michaelmas Assembly in October, an event hosted by Lady Bramwell at Thornfield House, with the annual efficiency of a woman who believed that social calendars were the skeleton upon which civilized life arranged itself. He was 31. He had been a duke since 23, when his father had died of a fever that had taken the county by surprise and the family by devastation. 8 years of managing a dukedom had given him the quality that Jessamine recognized immediately, the particular stillness of a person who had learned to carry weight without shifting. He asked her to dance. She accepted. He danced well, which she had expected, and he talked well, which she hadn't. Not the social performance of a man filling the required minutes, but the genuine, focused exchange of someone who had identified her as interesting and wanted to confirm the assessment. She confirmed it. They talked about the harvest, which had been poor, and about a book on agricultural reform she had read on the coach from Halifax, which he had also read, and about the county road that needed repair before winter, which she had opinions about, and he had authority over. He called at her lodgings the following week. He called again the week after. By November, the county had noted the frequency and formed its conclusions, and by December, when he asked her father's permission to propose, even Lady Bramwell, who made a practice of being surprised by nothing, admitted she had not expected it to move quite so quickly. The proposal was in the Rathmore Library on a Wednesday afternoon in December, with rain against the windows and a fire that had been built by someone who understood that this room would be occupied for a significant conversation. He was direct. She appreciated directness. He said he admired her mind, her capability, and the quality of her attention, which he described as uncommon and entirely welcome. She said yes. She said yes because he was intelligent, and because he was honest, and because when he looked at her, she felt the specific pleasure of being seen by someone whose seeing was worth something. She also said yes because she had weighed the evidence carefully, as she weighed all evidence, and had concluded that the balance was favorable. What she had not weighed, what she had noticed and catalogued, and set aside with the discipline of a woman who preferred conclusions to suspicions, was the name he had mentioned once in November, spoken with a care that was not quite casual enough to be casual. Celestine. Lady Celestine Ashford. A childhood acquaintance, he had said, a family connection of long standing. Jessamine had watched his face when he said the name. Something had moved in it. Not much, not enough for a verdict, but enough for a note in the margin of her assessment. She had made the note. She had not revised the conclusion. This, she would later understand, was the first time her judgment had been correct about the evidence and wrong about what the evidence meant. The wedding was in June. The ceremony was at the Rathmore Estate Chapel, stone, 14th century, the kind of building that had witnessed enough family history to have formed its own opinions about the proceedings. Jessamine had walked in on her father's arm and had thought, with the clarity she brought to significant moments, that this was correct. The feast was in the long gallery, 200 guests, and seated 4 places from the Duke's left, in a position that was socially defensible and emotionally unmistakable, was Lady Celestine Ashford. Jessamine saw her before the first course was served. She recognized her from a miniature she had seen once on the Duke's desk in November, a miniature he had moved to a drawer when she entered the room, with the unhurried precision of a man who believed he had been casual about it. She watched her husband. She watched him not look at Lady Celestine with the specific discipline of a man who was aware of exactly where someone was in a room and was managing the awareness rather than the feeling. She watched Lady Celestine not look at him with the same discipline, and she understood, with the clarity she had been trained to bring to evidence, that 2 people who were that careful about not looking at each other had a reason for the care. The room understood it too. Not everyone, but enough. She saw it move through the table in glances, in the quality of attention that shifted when the second course was brought, in the almost imperceptible pause in Lady Bramwell's conversation with Sir Alistair Graves. Jessamine set down her fork. She picked up her wineglass. She stood. The table quieted. 200 people looked at the bride. To Rathmore Hall, she said, her voice carrying the length of the gallery with the clarity of a woman who had been managing rooms since she was 16. To its history, its household, and its traditions. May it always have the grace to recognize what it has been given. She paused. 1 beat. And the wisdom to understand what it stands to lose. She drank. She set the glass down. She looked at her husband with the full, undefended attention she had given him in December when she said yes, and she held it long enough for him to understand that she was giving him the same quality of seeing. Only now, what she saw was different. She turned. She walked the length of the long gallery without looking back, collected her father from his chair with a glance that required no words, and was in the carriage before the third course was served. She did not leave Devonshire. This was the first thing the county noticed, and the thing it discussed most thoroughly in the weeks that followed. A bride who left a wedding feast might be expected to leave the county, to retreat to her father's house in Halifax, to disappear into the vast, forgiving anonymity of distance. Jessamine did not retreat. She took up residence at Hartfield Lodge, the dower house on the eastern edge of the Rathmore estate, which had been written into the marriage settlement at her father's insistence and her own quiet instruction. It was a handsome stone house, smaller than Rathmore Hall by considerable measure, but sound in its construction, and set on 40 acres that included the estate's eastern tenant farms, an apple orchard, and a stretch of the River Exe that ran along the southern boundary. Her father, who had said nothing during the carriage ride from the feast, except, "Tell me when you are ready," said nothing further until they reached the lodge. He looked at the house, at the grounds, at his daughter's expression, which had settled into the focused attention he recognized as her working face. "You are staying," he said. It was not a question. "I am the Duchess of Rathmore," she said. "I intend to be one." Her father looked at her for a long moment. "The settlement gives you the lodge and the eastern income independently. You do not need his permission or his cooperation for anything that falls within those terms." "I know," she said. "I wrote the terms." He left for Halifax on Thursday. She began work on Friday. The lodge had been unoccupied for 11 years, since the previous Dowager Duchess had died, and the household staff had been absorbed into Rathmore Hall. It was structurally sound, but neglected in the particular way that houses are neglected when no one with authority is paying attention. The roof wanted repair in 2 places, the kitchen garden had gone to seed, and 3 of the 7 tenant cottages on the eastern farms needed work that should have been done 3 seasons ago. Jessamine noted all of it. She had a full inventory completed by Monday and a plan of works drawn up by Wednesday, and on Thursday morning she sent a letter to the Rathmore steward, a man named Colborne, who had been managing the Duke's affairs for 15 years, requesting access to the estate accounts as they pertained to the eastern tenant farms. The reply came from the Duke. This was not what she had expected. She had expected Colborne's hand, Colborne's bureaucratic caution, the measured delay of a steward navigating an unprecedented situation. Instead, the letter was in the Duke's own handwriting. She recognized it from the notes he had written her during the courtship, the ones she had kept in a desk drawer and had not yet decided what to do with. "Your Grace," it read, "the accounts you have requested are extensive. I will have Colborne prepare them. If there are specific records you require, you may direct your inquiries to me. Rathmore." She read this twice. She noted the formality. "Your Grace," not Jessamine, not even Duchess. She noted that he had signed it Rathmore, the title, not the name. She noted that he had offered himself as the point of contact rather than the steward, which was either an assertion of authority or an opening of a door, and she was not going to determine which until she had more evidence. She wrote back, "Your Grace, I require the accounts for the eastern farms from 1815 to the present, the tenant ledger, and the maintenance records for the 7 cottages. I will send for them on Monday. Rathmore." She signed it with his title, her title now, which was either a statement of position or a mirror held up to his formality, and she allowed herself the private satisfaction of the ambiguity. The accounts arrived on Monday. They were, as she had suspected, in considerable disorder. Not dishonest. Colborne was scrupulous, but disorganized in the way that accounts become disorganized when the person responsible for reviewing them has not been paying sufficient attention. She spread them across the writing desk at Hartfield Lodge and began the work of reconstruction with the methodical precision her father had taught her, and by Wednesday she had identified 3 errors in the tenant ledger, an overpayment on materials for a repair that had never been completed, and a gap in the income records from the orchard that suggested someone had been selling cider without recording the revenue. She wrote to the Duke about the discrepancies. The letter took 1 draft, which surprised her. She had expected to need two, one for the version that was too cold, and one for the version that was correct. But the evidence was clear, and clear evidence had always been her steadiest ground. And she found that when she was talking about numbers, the other thing, the thing she wasn't going to name yet, receded to a manageable distance. His reply came the following morning. His reply was again in his own hand. The discrepancies you have identified are accurate. I have spoken with Colborne. The overpayment will be corrected. The orchard revenue will be investigated. Your diligence is noted. Rathmore. She read this. She set it aside. She thought about the phrase, "Your diligence is noted," which was the kind of thing a man said when he was acknowledging competence, without conceding anything personal. And she recognized the technique because it was one she used herself. The orchard investigation required a meeting, not a social call, a practical conference about the cider production and the missing revenue, attended by Colborne, Jessamyn's estate manager, a man named Farrow, whom she had hired from Halifax, and the Duke himself, who arrived at Hartfield Lodge on a Tuesday morning in July with the expression of a man conducting business and the posture of a man entering a room he was not sure he was welcome in. She received him in the study, not the drawing room. This was deliberate. The drawing room was for visitors and social performance. The study was where she worked, and she had no intention of rearranging her professional space to accommodate his comfort. He noticed. She saw him notice the slight adjustment in his attention as he took in the desk covered in ledgers, the map of the Eastern farms pinned to the wall, the inventory lists in her handwriting. He looked at all of it with the manner of a man reading a room and finding the room was not what he had expected. They reviewed the orchard accounts. She presented her findings with the precision her father had taught her. The numbers, the gaps, the pattern that suggested not theft, but neglect, the kind of revenue loss that happened when no one was paying close enough attention. Colborne confirmed her analysis. Farrow offered a proposal for restructuring the cider production. The Duke listened to all of it with the complete, focused attention she remembered from the courtship, the quality that had made her feel seen, and she found it considerably more difficult to sit with when it was directed at her across a desk covered in his failings. He asked two questions. The first was about the cider yield, which was practical and expected. The second was about her restructuring proposal, and the way he asked it, not challenging the conclusion but testing the reasoning, the way her father tested reasoning, the way a person tested something they intended to rely on, told her something she filed carefully and did not respond to. "The proposal is sound," he said when she had answered. "Implement it as you see fit." "I intend to," she said. He looked at her across the desk. He looked at the ledgers. He looked at the map on the wall. He said nothing further about the accounts. "The cottage repairs," he said. "Colborne tells me you have engaged a builder." "The north wall of Cottage 4 is structurally unsound," she said. "It should have been addressed 2 years ago." "It should have," he agreed. There was something in the agreement, not defensiveness, not excuse, but a quality of acknowledgement that sat between what was said and what was understood. He knew the cottages had been neglected. He knew she knew it, and he was not going to pretend otherwise. She found this, against her own instructions to herself, less satisfying to hold against him than she had expected. He left after 40 minutes. She did not offer tea. The weeks that followed established a pattern. The estate accounts, which had been the province of Colborne and the Duke's occasional review, became a shared territory, not by agreement, but by the force of Jessamyn's competence, which expanded into every gap it found the way water filled the cracks in a wall. She corrected the tenant ledger. She restructured the cider production. She had the 3 worst cottages repaired and the other 4 inspected. And she wrote a report on the Eastern farms that was, by any honest assessment, the most thorough analysis the Rathmore estate had received in a decade. The Duke read the report. She knew this because Colborne mentioned it in passing. The steward had developed the habit of mentioning the Duke's responses to her work with the careful neutrality of a steward, who understood he was carrying information between two people who were not speaking to each other about anything except accounts. "His Grace reviewed your report on the eastern farms," Colborne said on a Thursday morning, while they were examining the orchard. "He made no corrections." "Were corrections expected?" she said. Colborne looked at the orchard with the studied attention of a man choosing his next words carefully. "His Grace does not typically accept reports without annotation," he said. "The absence of correction is, in my experience, notable." She looked at the apple trees, which were heavy with the late summer fruit, and thought about a man who annotated everything and had found nothing to annotate, and about what that meant when the man in question had spent 8 years maintaining the position that his judgment was the final authority on all matters relating to the estate. She thought about the meeting in the study, the way he had looked at her desk and her maps and her handwriting on the inventory lists. She thought about the question he had asked about her restructuring proposal, the one that had tested the reasoning rather than challenged the conclusion. She thought, "He is reading me the way I read rooms." She thought, "I am not going to make it easy." The county, meanwhile, was watching with the attentive leisure of a Devonshire summer. The situation at Rathmore had become the most closely observed domestic arrangement since Lord Haverford had installed his Italian music teacher in the East Wing in 1807, which had ended badly for everyone except the music teacher, who had returned to Naples with an education in English manners and a generous settlement. Jessamine was seen at Hartfield Lodge, at the tenant farms, at the village market on Saturdays, where she bought provisions and talked to the tenants' wives with the ease of a woman who had grown up around working people and did not consider this a social descent. She was not seen at Rathmore Hall. She was not seen with the Duke except in the context of estate business. She was seen, on one occasion, declining a glass of wine at the Graves' summer supper, with a small shake of her head that 3 people interpreted correctly, and everyone else did not notice at all. And Lady Celestine Ashford wasn't seen in Devonshire at all, which the county noted with the precision of people who understood that an absence could be as significant as a presence. September brought the harvest, and the harvest brought the county together in the way that seasons of plenty always did, with gratitude that was genuine and social energy that was relentless. The Rathmore Harvest Supper was the first major occasion, and the question of whether the Duchess would attend became the most carefully discussed logistical matter in Devonshire since Lady Penville's disputed seating chart at the Midsummer Ball of 1815. Jessamine attended. She attended because the Harvest Supper was a duty of the Duchess's office, and she had told her father she intended to be a duchess, and she had meant it in every dimension the word contained. She arrived at Rathmore Hall at 6 o'clock on a Saturday evening in the first week of September, wearing a dress of dark blue silk that she had chosen with the specific attention of a woman who understood that her appearance in this room was a statement, and intended the statement to be precise. She had not been inside Rathmore Hall since the wedding feast. She walked through the entrance hall with the composed attention she brought to all significant rooms, and she noted what had changed and what had not, and she noted that the Duke was standing at the far end of the great hall with Colborne, and that he looked up when she entered with an expression that was neither surprise nor the managed attention she had catalogued. It was something rawer than both, something he covered in the time it took her to cross the room, but not before she had seen it. "Your Grace," she said. "Your Grace," he said. The symmetry of it was not lost on either of them, or on the room. The supper was arranged in the traditional manner, the long table, the tenants, and their families on one side, the county's quality on the other, the Duke and Duchess at the head. She took her place at his right, with the ease of a woman assuming a position she had earned, and the evening proceeded with the well-practiced rhythm of a harvest supper that had been held at Rathmore for 200 years. She talked to the tenants. She knew their names. She had learned them during the summer, during the cottage repairs and the orchard restructuring, and they responded to her with the warmth of people who had been listened to by a person in authority for the first time in several years. She talked to Mrs. Garrick, whose cottage was the one with the north wall she had repaired, and Mrs. Garrick said, "The wall is sound, Your Grace. The children have stopped sleeping in the kitchen." And Jessamine said, "I'm glad," and meant it with the uncomplicated sincerity that practical work produced in her. The Duke, beside her, was managing the table. She was aware of him throughout the way she was always aware of the most significant presence in any room. She was aware that he was listening to her conversations with the tenants, with the quality of attention she had identified in the study, the reading attention, the one that was gathering evidence. She was aware that he refilled her water glass without being asked, which was a gesture so small it should not have meant anything, and meant, in the specific vocabulary of their situation, considerably more than nothing. She did not acknowledge the water glass. She continued talking to Mrs. Garrick. The county dinners followed the harvest supper, with the reliable frequency of autumn in Devonshire. The Graves hosted in the second week, the Bramwells in the third. By October, Jessamine and the Duke had been in the same room on 6 occasions, and on each occasion, they had maintained the formal, correct relationship of 2 people who were married and separated and conducting themselves with a precision that the county found simultaneously admirable and agonizing. At the Graves' dinner, they had talked about the orchard yield, which had exceeded expectations under Farrow's management. At the Bramwell dinner, they had talked about the county road, which still needed repair. At neither dinner had they talked about anything that required the other's name to be spoken rather than the title, and at neither dinner had either of them mentioned the wedding feast, or the toast, or the long gallery, or any of the things that occupied the space between what they said and what the room understood they meant. The Michaelmas assembly at Thornfield House was the occasion that broke the pattern. It was Lady Bramwell's event, the same assembly where they had met the previous October, and Lady Bramwell had arranged the room with the strategic intelligence of a woman who had been managing social geometry for 30 years, and understood that the anniversary of a meeting was, in the right hands, its own kind of argument. 60 guests, the full county, and in attendance, Lord Dacre, a Viscount of 62, whose family had held land in Devonshire since the Reformation, and who had spent the summer observing the situation at Rathmore with the increasing displeasure of a man who considered the social order a personal responsibility. Jessamine saw him approach at 20 minutes past 9. She had been in conversation with Sir Alister Graves about the apple harvest. Sir Alister had orchards of his own and had been asking intelligent questions about Farrow's cider restructuring, and she felt the quality of the room shift, the way she always felt rooms shift, in the attention, in the angle of nearby conversations. "Duchess," Lord Dacre said, with the smile of someone who had been composing his remarks since dinner. "The Eastern farms are the talk of the county. Quite the enterprise." "The Eastern farms are sound property," she said. "They required attention." "Indeed," he said. "One might say they required a certain energetic hand. The tenants must find it novel. A duchess who inspects their cottages herself, almost as one might inspect a factory floor." The word factory performed the work he had designed it to do. In a county where land was heritage and trade was tolerated, the conflation was precise and deliberate. 3 people nearby adjusted their attention. Sir Alister's conversation paused. "The tenants," Jessamine said, holding Lord Dacre's gaze with the composure she had practiced in Halifax boardrooms and Bath assemblies, and every room she had ever entered, where someone had decided what she was before she had spoken. "Find it practical. Mrs. Garrick's north wall no longer leaks. Mr. Holt's drainage has been repaired. The orchard revenue has increased by 40% in a single season." She paused. "I inspect what I intend to improve, Lord Dacre. I have found it the most reliable method." The pause that followed was the kind that an entire room feels without all of it, knowing why. Lord Dacre's smile thinned. "Improvement is admirable," he said, "though one does wonder whether all the improvements at Rathmore are equally permanent." The word hung in the air. It was not about the cottages. Everyone within hearing understood it was not about the cottages. It was about her, the separated Duchess, the Halifax fortune, the woman who might at any moment be sent back to wherever new money went when old families were finished with it. Jessamine felt the room's attention sharpen. She opened her mouth to respond. She had the response ready. She had been managing this variety of condescension for a decade, and she knew exactly how many words it required, and in what register they would be most effective. She did not get to deliver them. "Lord Dacre," the Duke said from behind her left shoulder, and Jessamine had not known he was there, had not tracked his approach the way she tracked everything, which told her something about the state of her attention that she would have to examine later. His voice was not loud. It carried the weight that 200 years of title produced in a man who understood the weight and chose, deliberately, to deploy it. "The improvements at the Eastern Farms represent the most significant advancement in Rathmore estate management in my tenure as Duke." He stepped forward to stand beside Jessamine, not in front of her. Beside her. "The Duchess's work has been reviewed by myself and by Colborne, and I can assure you, and anyone else in this room with an interest in the subject, that the results are not merely permanent. They are the standard to which the remainder of the estate will be held." He looked at Lord Dacre with the stillness she recognized, the particular stillness of a man who had learned to carry weight without shifting. "I believe we are all invested in Rathmore's future," he said. "I know I am." The final sentence was not about the estate. The room knew it. Lord Dacre knew it. Jessamine, standing beside the Duke with the composed attention that was her natural register, understood it with a precision that made her chest ache in a way she refused to account for in this room. Lord Dacre said something appropriate about being glad to hear it. He moved away with the measured retreat of someone who had been outranked and knew it. The conversation resumed around them. The assembly continued. 20 minutes later, Lady Bramwell found her at the edge of the room, near the tall windows that looked out over the Thornfield Gardens in the October dark. "He stood beside you," Lady Bramwell said without preamble. "Not in front of you." "I noticed," Jessamine said. "Lord Dacre will be civil for the remainder of the season, possibly longer. He has an excellent memory for the occasions on which he has been corrected by a duke." "I could have handled Lord Dacre," Jessamine said. "I know you could," Lady Bramwell said. "He knows you could. That is precisely why what the Duke did was not rescue. It was alignment." She accepted a glass of wine from a passing footman. "There is a considerable difference between a man who steps in front of a woman and a man who steps beside her. The first believes she cannot manage. The second believes she should not have to manage alone." Jessamine looked across the room at the Duke, who was in conversation with Sir Alistair, and was not looking at her, and she thought about the word alignment, and about a man who had stood beside her and said, "The standard to which the remainder of the estate will be held," and about the final sentence, "I know I am," and what it meant when a man who had spent the summer communicating through ledgers and stewards said something that direct, in a room full of people who understood exactly what he was saying. She thought, that was not about the estate. She thought, he wanted me to know. She held her wine glass but did not drink from it. Not yet. Not here. The gesture meant something now, when she would raise a glass and when she would not, and she was not going to spend that currency until it was worth spending. He came to Hartfield Lodge 3 days after the assembly, on a Tuesday morning that was sharp with October cold, and clear enough that the boundary between the estates was visible from the study window. She was at her desk. She was always at her desk, reviewing the autumn accounts when she heard a horse arrive at the gate, and she knew before she looked that it was him, because she had developed over the summer and into the autumn an awareness of his approach that she had not authorized and could not seem to revoke. She met him at the door. She did not have him shown in. She opened the door herself, which was not the protocol for a duchess receiving a duke, and she did it because protocol between them had become a language she no longer wanted to speak. He had dismounted and tied the horse at the gate. He was wearing the coat she had seen in July, the practical one, not the formal one, and he was carrying a leather folder that she recognized as the kind that held legal documents. "Your Grace," she said. "Jessamine," he said. It was the first time he had used her name since the wedding. She felt it the way she felt a change in a room, a shift in the temperature of everything. "May I come in?" he said. She held the door open. He came in. She led him to the study, not the drawing room, because between them the drawing room had never been the right room, and she sat behind her desk, and he sat in the chair across from it, and they looked at each other across the surface that had been covered in his estate's failings all summer, and was now covered in the autumn accounts, which were in perfect order because she had made them so. He set the leather folder on the desk. He did not open it. "I owe you the truth," he said. "I have owed it to you since June, and I have been paying you in ledger corrections and cottage repairs instead, and I am aware that the currency is inadequate." She waited. "Celestine," he said, and the name in his mouth had a different quality than it had in November, less careful, more tired, the sound of something that had been carried too long. "We were understood, from childhood. Both families expected it. I expected it. She expected it." He paused. "When my father died and I inherited the estate and the debts that came with it, the expectation became impractical. Her family had nothing. The estate needed capital. The match that would have been convenient when both families were solvent became impossible when only one was." He looked at the desk. "I ended the understanding. She accepted it. She married Lord Ashford 3 years later. He died 2 years after that. She was widowed and alone, and I was managing an estate that needed money I did not have, and I told myself the matter was concluded." "It wasn't concluded," Jessamine said. "It wasn't concluded," he agreed. "I had resolved the practical question. I had not resolved—" He stopped. He looked at the window. "I had not resolved anything that mattered." "You invited her to the wedding," Jessamine said. "I invited her because I believed I could manage it," he said. "I believed that if she were present, and I conducted myself correctly, it would constitute a final conclusion. The ceremony would make it real, in a way that the ended understanding had not." He met her eyes. "I was managing a feeling I did not want to have by arranging the conditions under which I believed it would disappear." "It didn't disappear," she said. "It didn't disappear. And you saw it in the first 10 minutes, because you see everything. And I had married a woman who sees everything, and had somehow failed to account for that." She looked at him. She thought about the miniature on his desk in November. She thought about the note in the margin of her assessment. She thought about the wedding feast, the long gallery, the 200 candles, and the particular quality of pain that came from being correct about something you wished you had been wrong about. "You married me for the fortune," she said. "I married you because the estate required it," he said. "That was the reason I began. It was not the reason I continued." He leaned forward. "You read a book about agricultural reform on the coach from Halifax, and you knew more about it than I did. And you had opinions about the county road that were better than mine. And when I talked to you, I had the experience, for the first time in 8 years, of speaking to someone who was not performing for me." He paused. "I proposed to you because I wanted to. The fortune made it practical. You made it necessary. And then I failed the distinction on the day it mattered most, because I was trying to manage Celestine and the past and the future all in the same evening. And I could not manage all three, and the one I lost was the one I should have held on to." She sat with this. She sat with the study and the autumn light, and the man across her desk, who had just given her the first entirely honest account of what had happened, with no deflection and no self-justification and no attempt to make it smaller than it was. "What happened to Celestine?" she said. "After the wedding." "I wrote to her the following week," he said. "I told her the truth, that the understanding had been over for years, that it should have stayed over, and that my failure to resolve it had cost me the only person whose opinion I had come to value more than my own." He looked at the leather folder on the desk. She wrote back. She agreed. She wished me well. "The correspondence is concluded." Jessamine looked at the folder. "What is that?" she said. "The revised estate accounts," he said. "The entire estate, not just the Eastern farms. All of it. Income, expenditure, the maintenance schedule, the tenant agreements, the debt structure." He pushed it toward her. "I have been reviewing your methods. Your system is better than mine. I want you to see the full picture." She looked at the folder. She looked at the man who had brought it, who had brought her the complete accounts of his estate, which was, in the language they had been speaking all summer, the most vulnerable thing he could have offered. Every number, every failure, every gap, all of it, handed across a desk for her inspection. "You are giving me the accounts," she said. "I'm giving you everything," he said. "The accounts are where I knew how to start." She held his gaze. The autumn morning was coming through the study windows, and the Rathmore chimneys were visible on the horizon, and the distance between the two houses had never felt shorter or more significant. She opened the folder. She did not open it immediately. She held it for a moment. The weight of it, the physical reality of a man's entire financial life contained in leather and paper. Then she opened it and began to read. He watched her read. She was aware of him watching, and she let him, because this was what they did. They read each other, and the reading had become, over the months, a language more honest than speech. The accounts were in worse condition than the Eastern farms had been. She saw it in the first 3 pages. The debt that had driven him to seek a fortune, the structural costs of maintaining a house that had been built for a century with more money, the slow erosion of income that came from inattention and the wrong priorities. She also saw, on page 6, a column of adjustments dated July through October in his handwriting that followed her methodology exactly. He had been applying her system to the Western accounts. He had not told her. She looked up at him. "You adopted my ledger format," she said. "It is a superior system," he said. "You did not tell me." "I was not ready to admit how many things you were right about simultaneously," he said. "I was working through them in sequence." She looked at him across the desk that had been covered in his failings all summer and was now covered in his honesty. And she thought about a woman who had raised a toast in a long gallery and walked out, and about a man who had spent 4 months submitting his accounts for her review, one failure at a time, and had finally brought her all of them at once. "The Eastern farms are in order," she said. "Because of you," he said. "The tenant cottages are repaired. Because of you. The cider revenue is accounted for. Because of you." She set the folder down. "The accounts between us," she said. "Are they in order?" He looked at her. The expression was the one she had first seen at the assembly, the one that was not managed, not the ducal stillness, not the practiced attention, but the unguarded thing underneath that had been building since July and had been visible in glimpses through every meeting and every letter and every report he had returned without annotation. "No," he said. "They are not in order. They are in considerable arrears. I have been making payments, but the principal remains outstanding, and I do not believe it can be settled by correspondence." She looked at him. "What do you propose?" "A meeting," he said. "A direct meeting, without ledgers, without stewards, without the study desk between us." He paused. "Without the title." "Leander," she said. It was the first time she had used his name, It had the quality of an account being opened. Something new, starting from zero, with no arrears and no inherited debt. Jessamine, he said, and her name in his voice had everything the title had lacked: warmth and specificity, and the directness of a man who was looking at one person and seeing only that person. Lady Bramwell called at Hartfield Lodge on a Saturday morning, arriving at precisely 11, with the efficiency of someone who had been waiting for an appropriate interval and had determined that a week was sufficient. "He came to see you," Lady Bramwell said before she had fully settled into the chair Jessamine offered. "Tuesday. On foot. With a leather folder." "The county network is remarkably efficient," Jessamine said. "The county network," Lady Bramwell said, "is the fastest system of intelligence in the south of England, and I am its most reliable node." She accepted the tea Jessamine poured. "He brought you the accounts." "He brought me the accounts. All of them. All of them." Lady Bramwell held her cup and looked at Jessamine with the steady assessment of a woman who had been watching this situation develop since the Michaelmas Assembly a year ago, and who had formed her conclusions considerably earlier than she had let on. "There are men," Lady Bramwell said, "who apologize with words. They are often eloquent and occasionally sincere, and the words cost them nothing except the time it takes to arrange them." She sipped her tea. "And there are men who apologize with evidence, who cannot bring themselves to say the thing directly, and so they bring you their accounts, their records, their documentation of every failure, and they set it on your desk and say, 'Here, this is what I have done wrong. Judge it.'" She set the cup down. "The second kind is rarer, and considerably more reliable." Jessamine looked at the window. The apple trees in the orchard were bare now, November having stripped them to their structure, and the Rathmore chimneys were visible beyond them in the morning light. "He also told me the truth about Celestine," she said. "I know the truth about Celestine," Lady Bramwell said. "I have known it for 8 years. The county has been remarkably discreet, considering." "You might have told me," Jessamine said, "before the wedding." Lady Bramwell looked at her steadily. "Would you have believed me? A woman you had known for 8 months, warning you about a man you had already decided to marry?" Jessamine considered this honestly. "No," she said. "I would have weighed it and set it aside, as I did with every other piece of evidence." "Precisely," Lady Bramwell said. "Some conclusions must be arrived at through one's own accounting. The evidence is only useful when the person receiving it is ready to audit." She paused. "Are you ready now?" Jessamine thought about the study, and the leather folder, and his handwriting in her ledger format, and the sound of her name in his voice without the title attached. "I'm conducting the audit," she said. "Good," Lady Bramwell said. She finished her tea and stood. "One further observation, which I offer as someone who has watched a great many marriages in this county, including 2 of my own. The toast at the wedding, everyone talks about what you said. They remember the wisdom to understand what it stands to lose. What they do not discuss, because they did not see it, is what he did after you left the gallery." She paused at the door. He stood. He did not sit down for the remainder of the evening. He stood in that gallery for 3 hours, receiving congratulations and farewells, and he did not once sit in the chair you had left empty beside him. I was the last to leave. I saw his face when the room was clear. She looked at Jessamine. He knew. He knew within seconds of your toast what he had done, and he has been trying to find the right currency of repayment ever since. She left. Jessamine sat in the study and thought about a man standing in an empty gallery for 3 hours, and about the particular quality of regret that expressed itself not in words, but in the refusal to occupy a space that someone else had vacated. She wrote to her father that evening. The letter was longer than her usual correspondence. Her father preferred brevity, and she respected the preference, but this was not a matter that could be condensed without losing something essential. She told him everything: the accounts, The truth about Celestine. The assembly. The name. His reply arrived 5 days later, from Halifax, in the handwriting she had known all her life. Jessamine, you have always been the better judge of accounts. If the numbers balance, trust the numbers. If they do not, you will know what is owed and what is forgiven. Both are decisions, not feelings. Make them the way I taught you, with your eyes open and the ledger in front of you. Your father. She read this twice. She put it in the desk drawer beside the Duke's courtship letters, which she had still not decided what to do with, and which she now understood she had been keeping because the decision had already been made. She had simply been waiting for the audit to confirm it. He called at Hartfield Lodge on a Thursday evening in the 3rd week of November, which was not a state business, and both of them knew it was not a state business, and neither of them pretended otherwise. She had been expecting him, not because he had written, he had not, but because she had been reading rooms and reading people since she was 16, and the man who had brought her his entire accounts and said her name without the title was a man who was approaching a conclusion, and she had learned enough about his methods to know that he approached conclusions on Thursdays, when his weekly estate review was finished and his mind was clear. He arrived at 6. She opened the door herself again. He was carrying a bottle of wine. Rathmore Cellar, she could tell from the label. Something old and good, and chosen with the care of someone who understood that this particular bottle was going to mean more than its contents. I thought, he said, and paused, and she saw in the pause the full difficulty of what he was attempting. Someone who had spent his adult life managing situations, trying to arrive at one without managing it. I thought we might have dinner. Come in, she said. She had the kitchen prepare something simple, the kind of meal that said, "This is real," rather than, "This is an occasion." They ate in the study, because between them the study had become the honest room, and she would not relocate to the dining room as though this were a formal event, requiring formal furniture. They talked. Not about the accounts, about other things, about Halifax, which he asked about with the genuine curiosity of a man who had never been north of Leicestershire, and was interested rather than condescending about it. About his father, who had died when the estate was at its most vulnerable, and had left him with the weight of a dukedom and no instructions for carrying it. About the book on agricultural reform, which they had talked about a year ago at their first meeting, and which she had reread in September, and found different the way books are different when the person reading them has changed. He told her about the gallery, after the toast, after she had left. I stood, he said, for 3 hours. I received the remaining guests. I said the correct things. And I stood because sitting in the chair next to yours while it was empty was not something I could do. Lady Bramwell told me, she said. Lady Bramwell sees everything, he said. Lady Bramwell and I have that in common, she said. He looked at her. She looked at the bottle of wine he had brought, which was open on the desk between them, and at the 2 glasses, which were full, and which neither of them had yet raised. She thought about the toast. The first one. The wedding toast. The one that had carried her out of the long gallery, and into the carriage, and into Hartfield Lodge, and into 5 months of accounts and cottage repairs, and the slow, difficult work of being right about something she wished she had been wrong about. She thought about the second toast, the one that had not happened, the declined glass at the Graves' supper, the deliberate withholding that had said, I am not ready to raise a glass in this county, because the last glass I raised changed everything. She thought about the third, the assembly, the wine held but not drunk, the gesture suspended, the currency held in reserve until it was worth spending. She picked up her glass. He watched her. He understood. She saw him understand, the way she had seen him understand the accounts and the cottages and the name, that this was not a casual gesture, that between them, the raising of a glass had become a language, and she was about to say something in it. To Hartfield Lodge, she said. to sound property and clear accounts. She paused. And to the man who brought me his ledgers and trusted me to read them. She drank. He picked up his glass. His hand was steady. His expression was not. It was the unguarded one, the one she had first seen at the assembly and had been seeing with increasing frequency since, and she found that she no longer wanted to catalog it. She wanted to keep it. To the woman, he said, who raised a toast in my gallery and walked out, and was right to do it, and whom I have been trying to deserve ever since. He paused. To Jessamine. He drank. She set her glass down. He set his down. The study was warm, and the November dark was outside the windows, and the Rathmore chimneys were not visible in the dark, but were there, the same way the distance between the two houses was a thing they had measured in surveys and ledgers and letters, and was now a thing they were going to have to measure differently. He stood. She stood. He came around the desk that had been between them for every meeting, every review, every account. And he stood before her, and she looked up at him with the attention she brought to everything that mattered. And he looked at her with the expression that had nothing managed in it at all. The accounts, she said. Between us. Yes, he said. Are they settled? He took her hand. They are not settled, he said. They are opened, properly this time, with accurate figures and no outstanding debts from previous terms. She looked at their hands. She thought about a woman who had signed her letters with his title, and a man who had signed his with the same, and about what it meant that they were now standing in a room using each other's names and holding hands over a desk that had held every honest thing between them. Leander, she said. Jessamine, he said. He kissed her. It was not managed. It had the certainty of a conclusion arrived at through evidence, thorough, deliberate, and entirely supported by the data. She kissed him back with the precision she brought to everything she had ever decided was true, and the study was warm, and the wine was on the desk, and the glasses were empty, and neither of them required a refill. She moved into Rathmore Hall in December, which was not the time one typically took possession of a duke's household. But Jessamine had never organized her life around typical, and she was not going to begin with the most important decision she had ever made. She brought the Hartfield accounts with her. She brought Pharaoh. She brought the system she had built over 5 months of managing 40 acres and 7 cottages and an orchard, and she applied it to the remainder of the estate with the methodical attention of a woman who had been given the full ledger and intended to make every column balance. Leander watched her do it with the expression she had catalogued at the assembly, and at the dinner, and in the study, the unguarded one, and said on the second morning, over breakfast in the library, she was already reorganizing. You are going to change everything. I'm going to correct the accounts, she said. Everything else will follow. He looked at her across the breakfast table, across the life she was already building inside his house, with his books and her numbers, and the combined weight of 2 estates that were no longer separated by a boundary she had once used as a fortress. The toast, he said, at the wedding. You said, the wisdom to understand what it stands to lose. I remember what I said, she said. I understood it, he said. I have not stopped understanding it since. She looked at him. She looked at the library, which needed reorganizing, and the windows, which faced south toward Hartfield Lodge. Still hers, and it would remain hers, because she had written the terms, and she was not a woman who surrendered sound property. She picked up her tea. Not wine. Tea. The morning version of the gesture, the private one, the one that belonged to a life rather than a performance. To Rathmore, she said quietly. To Rathmore, he said. And neither of them specified which part of Rathmore they meant, the house, the title, the estate, or the marriage, because the answer, by December, was all of it. Her father had always said the best accounts were the ones you understood completely, every column, Every entry, every figure in its right place. She understood this one completely, and the balance, at last, was exactly where it should be.